hey, when the shots aren't falling, maybe they are a little bit of front runners in a little bit right now, where when the shots are falling and the vibes are good, that's when you're seeing guys lay out on the floor and you're seeing that extra burst of energy and effort when the shots aren't falling, when you actually need to be locked in defensively and focused and all of those things. That's maybe where you're seeing a little bit of lack there.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible. Pay heed all who enter, and beware of this podcast. That's right, this is the Pay Heed Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. We are brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible. And Emprise Bank is helping out in the local community in the Kansas City area with SBA loans. So you can thank Emprise Bank if you see a small business or if you support small businesses, or if you are a small business looking to expand, check out Emprise Bank. They can help you out and get you set up with everything with SBA loans and more. So a big thank you to Emprise Bank, our sponsor here on the show, your partner and possible member FDIC. I'm Nick Springer. I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. And of course, we are going to be talking about some KU basketball here today on the show as Kansas took on Colorado last night on Tuesday night. Almost forgot what day it was. I forget what day it is a lot of times. It was a day that ended in Y, in which they played against Colorado last night. If you're listening on Wednesday, if you are listening or watching today or any day, you should always be sure to subscribe. And if you're on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN, you can subscribe, like the channel, drop a comment. If you're listening on audio platforms, you can subscribe there as well. Leave us a 5-star rating and review to share your thoughts. Tons of ways to get in contact with the show. You can interact on social media with our podcast account at Pay Heed KCSN on Twitter. Kevin is at K Flaherty KCSN. I'm at Nick Springer 29. Lots of ways to join in on the conversation. And we had plenty of people giving their thoughts last night on our Twitter page about the performance for Kansas against Colorado and so on and so forth. We'll dive into that and plenty more here on today's show. Kevin, Kansas wins 71-59. What was your immediate reaction takeaway from defeating an Colorado team that is now still winless in conference play?
I think that was pretty much it. Kansas wins. There wasn't. It was a game. I think some people were frustrated that KU didn't pull away or put its foot down, and and I understand that reaction certainly. Colorado did hang around with Houston over the weekend. That was a 4-point game, I think, inside of 4 minutes to go. So Colorado is capable of hanging around. They do feel, though, Nick, don't you think, like miles removed from the team that beat UConn and started off 9-2 this year. But at the same time, Kansas didn't play super well. Kansas wasn't super sharp. Kansas still wins by double digits. And I get that again, you're kind of sitting there when it was 6 or whatever, and you're like, well, come on, like put these guys away. There was a stretch when KU put it up to about 15 or so where I felt like over that stretch it played pretty well, but overall it was kind of a ho-hum performance and as expected, I guess you would say. How about you?
Yeah, this game had some interesting storylines coming into it. You have Tad Boyle, of course, who played at Kansas and has been a longtime coach at Colorado. You had Danny Manning, who is now an assistant with Colorado, coming back as well to Allen Fieldhouse. So a couple cool storylines there. And Colorado hasn't beaten KU since 1983, by the way, at Allen Fieldhouse. So now, granted, they obviously haven't played at Allen Fieldhouse for probably the last, almost dozen years at this point since they left the Big 12 and have now come back. But even still, yeah, this is a game where coming into it, you wanted to see Kansas really dominate, right? Coming off of the loss against Kansas State on Saturday, which, by the way, Kansas State picked up another win last night against Arizona. So they are suddenly a good team, I guess. They've seemed to figure it out. But you wanted to see Kansas turn the page from that. And obviously, we've been highlighting it on the show. This is this kickoff of what appears to be a relatively manageable stretch for Kansas through the rest of February. Starting with Colorado. And it's bookended by Colorado. They just played Colorado. They're going to play 3 other games, then they'll play Colorado again to sort of bookend this sort of stretch that they have coming up, which does include a Western road trip to Utah to take on Utah and BYU, which we'll get into later on. But Yeah, I don't know. The first half to me, Kevin, was really weird because Kansas ends the half up 14. And I think both teams, I think Kansas felt like maybe they could have been up more. And I think Colorado could have felt like should have been down less. It was kind of a weird first half where Kansas got out and kind of kept them arms length, and Colorado fought back a little bit. I thought once again, KJ Adams was the best player on the floor for Kansas in the first half, just like he was against K-State. He was really doing it all, had some great passes to Hunter Dickinson on an alley-oop at one point. He himself was on the receiving end of a dunk as well. Had that emphatic block, which I think came in the second half, but even still, a really, really strong game from KJ Adams, especially in the first half again. And Bill Self really, really harped a lot ahead of this game on Thursday when he met with the media about consistency, about consistent energy, and about KU finding that, because Bill Self again said, "Hey, I think that this team has proven they can beat some of the best teams in the country, but it's just not been on a night-to-night basis, on a consistent basis." Right? There was a lot of talk about that, and I think that just further goes to highlight why KJ Adams is playing such the role that he is playing, because night in and night out, KJ Adams is unequivocally the guy that brings the most energy, period. And I think it's obvious that Bill Self is looking for that. It wants to see more of that from the rest of the team, and that's why KJ Adams is playing. And he's playing very well. He played very well the last two games. And I know people will probably still push back and say, "Hey, the ceiling of this team probably involves more Flory, or probably involves other aspects of the team," but that's not happening right now, at least on a consistent basis. And then KJ, on the other hand, to me, unequivocally raises the floor of this team because of the energy that he brings. Like, even if things are not going perfectly for Kansas, when KJ's on the floor, he seems to be sort of that steadying presence, similarly to like what we speak about with DeJuan running the point. But with KJ, it's from more of an energy aspect. So I was really impressed with how he played in the first half, and he brought the energy, and that to me was the biggest standout. Is KJ's going to continue to get a lot of minutes, I think, and it's not about. People have sort of painted this as a love affair with Bill Self and KJ Adams. I think that's part of it. Obviously, with KJ being, at this point, a legacy player, a guy that's been on this team for a long time and has a strong relationship with Bill Self. But I honestly think part of it is you look at it the other way, which is guys like AJ Storr, Rylan Griffin, Floyd Badunga, they are not consistent enough to be able to merit having that, slice of the pie of playing time, basically. And I get it, right? You want to see guys play through, like early in the season, there was so much discussion about, oh, well, they should be able to play through mistakes, play through, whatever. We're beyond that at this point. Like we're past that. We're to the point now where you just need to play the guys that are going to give you the best chance to win. And I think that's been Bill Self's mentality this whole season. And I think I am starting to turn a corner of, it's almost less about KJ Adams and more about the other guys. And obviously in the case of Flory, he's a freshman, right? He's had up and downs. I mean, he was ascending at an incredible rate in January, seemingly kind of plateaued or hit a wall a little bit, but I still have high hopes for him. But you look at some of the transfers that KU has had, and obviously it's been well documented the ups and downs that those guys have had as well. And KJ Adams, regardless of how he fits in or whatever, what you're going to get with it, right? Like there's no question what KJ Adams is going to bring you to the floor on a minute by minute, night in, night out basis. And that's why I think he's seeing so much of the floor. And again, honestly, he's been KU's best player the past two games. I mean, he was by far the best player against K-State. And in the first half, he was great against Colorado. In the second half, I think he kind of faded a little bit, but still, he's not only deserving of those minutes at this point, but he's proven why. I mean, he's playing very well at the stage of the season.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest misnomers, and we've talked about it, is that you just need ceiling to win in March, right? And that's not true, because you're not going to hit your ceiling over the course of 6 games. There's going to be some games where you're going to hit your floor, and you're going to hit it at least for one game, maybe even more than that. And so somebody who raises your floor to where it's, hey, we can beat a good team even if we aren't playing our very best, that's just as valuable, if not even more so if you're wanting to make a deep run. Now, if you're just wanting to win one game, if you're wanting to say, hey, we play Duke on Wednesday night, what's the best, lineup or whatever, that's when you look at ceiling, et cetera. But in order to even get to the Final Four, in order to cut down the nets, you have to have a high floor too. And I do think that that's a lot more important than maybe people are making that out to be. And I loved your point about how it's not about KJ. It is about the other guys out there. You think that Bill Self doesn't watch AJ Storr and say, hey, man, like, if AJ Storr is turned up and scoring and he can give us 15 and I just don't want that. I'm going to keep that guy at the end of the bench. Like, and I'm not trying to blame AJ Storr on that at all. I'm just saying, there is a method to the madness. It's not like Bill Self doesn't look at this team and have some of the same thoughts that maybe you or I or somebody else has. Like he sees, hey, our highest potential guy is probably Flory on the entire team. I think you would agree with that. And, at least in terms of being a high NBA pick, the best possible scenario would be for Flory to go, all lottery pick on somebody. But also, how realistic is that's going to happen and happen consistently over the course of 6 games in March? And so all of those things are things that you have to weigh. And again, that's not a rip on Flory. He's a freshman. You're going to have some great moments. Even last night within the game, right? Like Flory had some terrific moments where he looked like a lottery pick, and he had a couple moments where Colorado's big man kind of pushed him around a little bit, and that's to be expected. And so I think the biggest kind of takeaway for me, Nick, is they were able to win last night. I didn't think the energy was probably where it needed to be. And I think the disappointing thing wasn't necessarily in the score line. I think they were favored, by like 17 and a half, I think was the line. But more than that, you're just running out of chances to ramp up that consistency. And, we're no longer in December where it's, oh, hey, we'll get our footing in February and we'll be good to go in March. No, we're midway through February now. And so when we talked about this segment of playing Colorado twice, playing Utah, BYU, I know I'm blanking on somebody in there.
Oklahoma State is the other one.
Oklahoma State, thank you.
Yeah.
We looked at this as sort of a get-right period, right? It's a chance to find some success, build some confidence, develop that consistency before those 3 final games at the end of the year where you have Texas Tech, Houston, and Arizona. And I think that was maybe the disappointing thing about last night's game, Nick, was it felt like, when the teacher calls out everybody's name in class and somebody just says present or whatever, like it felt like that for a game, right? Like KU showed up, like they turned in the project. There was not extra work that they did. They did not go for extra credit. And at this point, you really feel like things should be turned up to 11 to kind of try and get yourself into the best position for March. And so from that perspective, it maybe felt like a little bit of a wasted opportunity.
Yeah, I would describe it as a very uninspiring game.
Yeah.
Like it did, like KU, like you said, put in just enough energy to get the win. When Colorado fought back a little bit early in the second half, KU, did enough to kind of extend the lead a little bit again, and then took their foot off the gas again. Right? This was very much an uninspiring game, and that's where I kind of wanted to highlight KJ Adams, because I think he was the one guy that was at sort of tuned up, it seemed like, for the majority of the game compared to everybody else. Because I think this kind of feeds into the complaint with Hunter Dickinson is Hunter Dickinson goes 19 and 9, 8 of 11 from the floor, 9 rebounds, he had a block 2, and it's like, it just didn't feel like he had major impact, right? Like he produces on the scoreboard, but I think that's where the frustration has really come from the past couple of years with Hunter Dickinson. It's like you're watching him and you're thinking, man, what is this guy doing? And he's got 15 and 8. It just doesn't feel like it doesn't feel impactful, I guess. It's like the opposite of a guy, hitting a couple clutch threes. It's just he's able to score a lot, but it just doesn't feel like it's very impactful, I guess. So he ends up, with a really, really quality game overall for KU. KJ Adams, we talked about him. He had 10 and 5. KJ Adams also had 5 assists. DeJuan Harris had 5 assists. But another issue that I kind of wanted to highlight here before we go to break is it felt to me, and you can hop in on this too, Kevin. It felt to me again like a similar issue we talked about with the K-State game, where it just didn't seem like there were guys that wanted to shoot.
Yeah.
Same issue again, where there was a lot of driving to pass. There was a lot of drive and kick, but the guy wasn't shooting. Zeke Mayo, again, I think, again, if you're box score watching, Zeke Mayo, 13 points, 9 rebounds. He was 3 of 7 from 3, which is really pretty good. But again, it just, I don't know. It doesn't feel like that spark is there for him either, or really for a lot of guys on this team, and that's what they need to find. And maybe it seems kind of silly to say this, but they need to find a way to just go back to having fun playing the game. Like I couldn't tell you the last time I watched this team and felt like they were having fun or having a good time. But besides KJ Adams, I mean, he's the guy that is always fist pumping and so on and so forth. But it's got to translate to more than just him. But that was one other thing that stuck out to me is again, you've got to have guys that are confident and willing to shoot, and it just didn't feel like KU had that very much in this game, where they were just waiting for somebody else to make the play. And if you have 5 guys who are all waiting for one of the other to make the play, guess what? Nobody's going to make the play. And that's how you lose in the second round in March again. So that is a real concern for me. And obviously we've talked about it a lot with Zeke Mayo specifically, with his home and road splits. He's really struggled away from Allen Fieldhouse, and that's got to change. I think he's the guy specifically I look at and say, hey, look, you're a Lawrence kid. Yes, you didn't start at KU, but you should understand what it means to play for this team. I think you've got to be the one that flips the switch besides KJ Adams and DeJuan Harris and Hunter Dickinson. Like you're the guy that needs to inject some life into your game, and hopefully it spreads to the rest of the team.
It's kind of funny. You've seen Forgetting Sarah Marshall.
Is that's the rom-com, right?
Yeah. And
I don't know.
Oh, right. Like a little surf shop owner in it or whatever. And he says this thing, when a guy's trying to learn how to surf or whatever, he says, you're doing too much, do less. I kind of feel like that's Zeke Mayo right now, where even when he's taking the shots that you're talking about, a lot of times he's not pulling it necessarily in rhythm off the catch. It's, okay, I'm going to catch the ball, I'm going to dribble, step back it, and then take a shot, that's probably not as good as taking the shot in rhythm. And don't get me wrong, I get that there are some times when a guy's screaming out and you're worried about getting your shot blocked. But there are also opportunities, I think, there where he hasn't taken those shots. And those are the shots that right now KU needs him to take. Hey, you're in rhythm catching the ball, on a shooting opportunity. Take the shot. That's a good shot for KU. Great. That's, there are some guys I get, DeJuan Harris in particular, where he catches the ball sometimes, in those situations, and it's 10 seconds in the shot clock, and so he dribbles out and resets, where he's kind of like, well, we can get that shot at any point, and we want to work for a better shot. There's not a whole lot of better shots that I would rather have, Nick, than Zeke Mayo in rhythm 3-point shot. And I think, especially with Rylan Griffin kind of struggling to find his range a little bit, I'm still not worried. I think guys go through shooting slumps. Rylan Griffin's a proven shooter. I think the shots are going to start falling. He just needs to see them, start falling a little bit. But to your original point, yeah, I think there are some times where he's thinking too much about attacking the closeout and not enough of, hey, this initial shot look is a great shot. Just take it.
Yeah.
You're doing too much. Do less.
What else you should just take is a visit to homefieldapparel.com, where you can shop home field apparel, get tons of KU gear. It's snowed again in the Kansas City area, so if you're in the Kansas City area, you want to get something to keep you warm, Home Field Apparel's got you covered with jackets, sweaters, joggers as well, nice warm pants as well. You can also just go for the t-shirts. I've got the Pay t-shirt on, as always, repping here on the show. You can find 40 plus Kansas items, as well as 140 other schools. Also, some of the best vintage, comfortable apparel around that you'll find over at homefieldapparel.com. And if you haven't shopped there yet, you can use the promo code PAYHEAT24 for 15% off your first order. That's PAYHEAT24 for 15% off your first order. More Kansas basketball talk is coming up next. Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your number one source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com. This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. We are brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in Possible, member FDIC. Be sure to check them out. Check out their SBA loans as well if you're a small business in the area. They support local businesses as well. Do a great job with that. So check out Emprise Bank. I'm Nick Springer. I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. If you haven't already, you can subscribe on a YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. You can drop a comment, like the video. If you are listening on the audio platform, you can subscribe wherever you get your audio, Apple, Spotify, wherever else, and also leave us a 5-star rating and review there as well to help us grow the show as well. So thank you so much if you've already done that. We really appreciate your support as always. I wanted to kind of dive deeper a little bit, Kevin, on the Zeke Mayo point, because I'm a bit flustered with kind of how things have gone for him in terms of he seems to also let the shooting or the timidness of his lack of shooting affect him in other areas of his game. There was a play against Colorado where he just kind of lost the ball and didn't dive on it, right? And those are the plays where Bill Self is going to clip that, I think, and watch that over again. Because, he always talks about, Self, I think, always talks about, regardless of whether or not shots are falling, you can't always dictate that, but you can dictate everything else that you're doing, right? With your effort and how you're playing. And I am growing concerned that Zeke Mayo is I think at times letting his scoring ability or lack of scoring ability when he's struggling impact the rest of his game. And that alarms me a bit, I think, right now.
Yeah, I could see that. I think it's understandable sometimes to get frustrated, right? When the ball's not falling in. There are some guys that when they do that, they press. They try and ramp things up to try and make things happen, and sometimes that can be destructive. Where they're driving into the middle of three guys or whatever else. I do agree. I think not that Zeke doesn't play hard, because I think he really does, but I also think that he can get down on himself, and that can impact him on kind of a play-by-play basis, like what you're talking about. We've talked on the show all year about how whether or not the ball is falling for AJ Storr, that impacts a lot of kind of which AJ Storr you're getting, and it shouldn't be for that way for him. And when you've looked at Bill Self's substitution patterns with AJ Storr, I think that reflects that level of frustration. I've seen a lot of comments online, basically equating to why did Bill Self get AJ Storr if AJ Storr wasn't going to fit in? And I think there's always an idea of, hey, this guy's a ready-made scorer. He can do this. We know that that's in there. If he comes here and he embraces the culture and he does, the things that we ask, and he works to where he's doing these other things, you've got a star player on your hands. And so I understand taking that swing for sure, especially when you have somebody who scored at the power level the way that AJ Storr did. I do think, I hesitate obviously to put Zeke and AJ in the same category. I'm just saying, like, to your overall point, if you're looking at this team as a whole, I think that's something you could put on this team in general is, hey, when the shots aren't falling, maybe they are a little bit of front runners in a little bit right now, where when the shots are falling and the vibes are good, that's when you're seeing guys lay out on the floor and you're seeing that extra burst of energy and effort. when the shots aren't falling, when you actually need to be locked in defensively and focused and all of those things, that's maybe where you're seeing a little bit of lack there.
Well, it goes back to something we've talked about before, which is, this team, when things are going good, they are going really good. But when things are going bad, they struggle a little bit, right? I think they let that affect them. And whether that's player leadership, coach leadership, there was a lot of questions to Bill Self ahead of this game about, do you mix things up? Is it a player thing? Is it a coach thing? Are you trying different things in practices? And I thought Bill Self was actually had a pretty good answer about this. Somebody asked him about that. Do you mix things up when you have a team that you're trying to get a spark out of? And Bill Self was basically like, you get an hour and 50-minute practice and you're playing 2 games a week. Like, changing up that hour 15-minute practice in February, I don't think is really going to lead to any major changes. And I agree with him on that. Like, it's at this point, it has to basically come during the games, right? Because, and we touched on this before, in conference play, you're playing 2 games a week, so there's no time. There really isn't time for you to try to hit the real reset button or anything like that. And so that's where I come away from this game feeling. I don't want to say dejected, but certainly not feeling fantastic. Is that this was a game where if there was a chance or a feeling of you could maybe turn the page a little bit, flip that switch, maybe reignite yourself, this was probably the game to do it. You're playing against a Colorado team that is just not good. They're just not a very good team. They were dealt a tough hand. Kevin, this team had 3 NBA players on it last year. Let's call it up. And they lost that. And so it was always probably going to be tough for them coming into this season. And obviously we've seen that for them to this point. But from the Kansas perspective, this was your chance maybe to try to reignite that. And instead it just felt like Kansas was in the mood to just do enough to put Colorado at arm's length and nothing more. And that's what was disappointing, because so often, so many times at Allen Fieldhouse, when you see games like this, what happens? It snowballs, right? Kansas gets going and they just absolutely eat you up, especially in the second half. And that just didn't happen. And I think it didn't happen because of that, lack of energy. And Bill Self even spoke about the fans a little bit and said, when things are going bad is when we need the fans the most.
Yeah.
When KU's struggling is when they need the fans the most. And so I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, I think also I was thinking about this going into this game, Kevin, about when you play a game like this against an opponent like that, and this is not a disrespect to Colorado at all. Just a team that you look at them and they haven't won a game in conference in play, and they've lost pretty significantly in some games. When you go into a game like this and you're Kansas, I was thinking, unfortunately, from the Kansas perspective, the only real possible outcomes for this game is probably going to be negative, because if you just beat their brakes off and win by 25 or 30, it'll just be, Colorado's a bad team. If you play like this, like KU ended up playing, which is kind of a mopey, just sort of, going through the motions type of game, and you win by 12, right? Okay, whatever. People come away from the game saying, what happened, right? Where's the energy? Why didn't you go crush him? So from an outside perspective, it was kind of a lose-lose situation. And I think in that sense, besides winning the game, obviously, but I just didn't know that there was necessarily a way, unless it was just something absolutely crazy happened. You were not going to come away from this game feeling extremely positive about KU, I don't think, regardless of what happened. And with that in mind, I just wonder what the mindset of the locker room is after that game, right? Is Bill Self ripping them after this game? You get a win at home, after the loss against K-State, but and obviously without being there, it's hard to say, but I'd be curious about what these next couple of days are going to be like for KU, because the reality is you've got a 2-game road trip out west at altitude against Utah and BYU, against a Utah team that is similar to Colorado in that they are bad but have had some interesting wins at times, and then a BYU team that is firmly on the bubble and is going to be probably pretty desperate to get a big marquee win, especially at home. And we already know how tough of a place it is to play at Provo as it is. So heading into this trip, I mean, where are you at on this right now? I mean, are you concerned? Are you feeling? Because I am. In case you didn't know, I'm feeling somewhat concerned at this point.
Yeah.
But I mean, where's your mindset at heading into this trip for Kate?
Yeah, I'm right there with you in that I feel like you're running out of those chances, right? To kind of, and the thing is, like we've said all along, it's not about having one strong performance. I mean, yes, you have to have one strong performance to have two strong performances to have three. But we've seen this team come out over one game and be really, really good. We've seen this team over a half look like one of the very best teams in the entire country. And the issue is you're running out of chances to kind of stack positives. And I think your point about how's Bill Self dealing with this team is well put, right? Because there's also a danger of, hey, you're ripping these guys. They're at a moment where maybe they need to build some confidence or need some things to go right, and that's where knowing your guys and knowing your locker room really comes in handy. Is this a team that can deal with, hey, you're going to get after them when the effort isn't perfect? Or is it, is it a team that you need to kind of say to them like, hey, over that stretch where you guys push this thing out to 15 in the second half, that's who we want to beat. Like, let's capture that. And to be honest, it's probably not all one or the other, right? It's probably a combination of things. I think we haven't really talked about the defense. I know you and I talked about it right before we came on. Held Colorado to 59, but at the same time, I thought there were times the defense was objectively poor. And you look at that first half in particular, Colorado missed some open shots. Colorado missed some open passes where it was an easy bucket for a team that executes offensively at even, sort of a middling level, and Colorado didn't do it. And so on one hand, you come out of it and you say, oh, the numbers are pretty good. Looks like KU's defense was pretty great. But if you turn on the tape, you say, well, gosh, like take a middle of the road Big 12 offense and put them against that defensive effort. And that's not going to be good enough. You're going to get lit up. And so I think there's a little bit of both. I think you do look at those defensive stretches and the lack of consistency, and you have to point to them and say, hey, this isn't good enough. But I do think you also look at where things went right, like during that stretch, like when they kind of pushed things out before halftime as well, being another, kind of strong stretch in there. And you say this, yes, more of this, hey, that was a great play by you here, Flory. Like, we need more of that. AJ, you did this right on this possession. Like, we need to see more of that. And so I do think that back to your original point, which feels like an hour ago when I started talking, but I think you do get concerned at this point because there just aren't that many more games. And like we've talked about on this show so often, it feels like we were talking about this stretch like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
In terms of this is Kansas's chance to potentially stack some wins, get off on the right foot to where you face those finals, tough games. You go into the Big 12 tournament where things are going to be tough, and then you go into the NCAA tournament. You don't want to be coming out of this stretch sort of where you entered it. You need to make gains, and I think that's the concern is at this point is Kansas going to come out of this stretch better than it went into it?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I wholeheartedly agree with that, which is, you're right. You have now 4 games basically left over this stretch before you play 3 teams consecutively that are top 12 in KenPom, by the way, to end the season. And you're right. You need to be in a better place at the end of this stretch than you are right now. And you basically swung and missed on the first attempt at it. The first try against Colorado last night, right? Again, it was a very uninspiring game. It was Kansas did just enough, but clearly wasn't interested in doing much more. To your point about the defense, I agree. Colorado missed some open shots in the first half that if they hit them, maybe that's a tighter game at halftime, and maybe there is more game pressure on Kansas early in the second half, especially with how Colorado started the second half. So there's a lot to look at with that where, sure, you give up 59 points, but I think I agree with you on that. Colorado missed out on a lot of opportunities that an Arizona, a Texas Tech, a Houston, an Iowa State, a K-State are not going to miss out on. And obviously, we saw that with what happened with KU against K-State on Saturday. So,
Yep.
But looking ahead, by the way, KenPom still has KenPom has projected KU to win every game left they have on the schedule except for the game at Houston, which is interesting. So they still seem to like KU. KU's offense on KenPom is 40, which they've actually dropped, I think. I'm pretty sure they were higher than that. They continue to have a top 10 defense if you look at some of the metrics on KenPom. When you look at Utah, who's going to be their next opponent on Saturday in Salt Lake City, Utah is another similarly to Colorado in that they've just been not very impressive this season. They have 5 wins in conference play. They did beat BYU in overtime at home, or not? Yes, BYU in overtime at home earlier in January. They beat Cincinnati at home. They beat the same Colorado team by 13 at home as well. They also beat TCU on the road in kind of a weird game that they somehow won back in January as well. So a couple quick notes on this Utah team. They are one of the things that they are really not very good at is turnovers, both on offense and defense. And that's one thing we didn't really touch on with Colorado is another team that turns the ball over a lot. And I think this is where you would point to what you were mentioning with the defensive effort for Kansas. Colorado is a team that coming into that game against Kansas turned the ball over a lot, and Kansas didn't hardly force any turnovers. Colorado had one of their best games offensively in terms of not turning the ball over this season. So that's one thing where you would say, okay, well, that's a bit concerning. But Utah is similar. They are bottom 100 in the country in turnovers offensively. They also don't force a lot of turnovers defensively. Funnily enough, Kevin, there are 368 teams, I think, in D1, 368. This Utah team is 362 in free throw percentage.
Yeah.
They are one of the worst free throw shooting teams in the country, which seems, again, I don't even know how that's possible. I mean, it's free throws. There's no real analysis to be had. It's you just either make them or you miss them, I guess. But they're really, really bad there as well. But
they also have one of the weirdest stat things that I've ever seen in that they're one of the tallest teams in the country, Nick. They're third in the country, I think, in average height, according to KenPom. But, Nick, they are also 358th in getting their shots blocked. Like how does that mesh up? Like, it's one of those things that you would not put together necessarily like, oh, this team is huge. Like, people are definitely sending their shots into the rafters all the time. But that's what's happening for Utah right now. They get their shots blocked a ton, one of the highest shot block rates in the country, despite the fact that they're humongous. I mean, they go 6'6" at point guard, 6'9", 6'8", 230 at the 3. 6'8", 240 at the 3, then 6'10", 7'1". So I mean, this is going to be the biggest team that KU plays, certainly in the Big 12, if not overall in the country. I think like Elon may be like the toughest team or the tallest team or whatever. No, it's actually Duke. Okay, Duke is the tallest team in average height. Elon number 2, Utah number 3. So Utah is huge. Utah also gets his shot blocked all the time, which to me, again, does not match up. It's one of those weird statistical things.
So KU gets Utah on Saturday, and then the quick turnaround on Tuesday, they'll take on BYU, and BYU is an entirely different beast. They are an extremely efficient offensive team. They've been very, very strong there. They're one of the better three-point shooting teams in the country so far this season, and they're going to be taking them on Tuesday. If in case you're wondering why we're kind of doing this double preview here, I'll be going out of town on vacation this weekend, so You probably won't hear from us again until after the BYU game. So we're kind of doing a little bit of Utah plus BYU talk here before I go on vacation for a couple of days. Chief season ended, and I felt like this is a good time ahead of March Madness. Take a couple days. Gonna go spend some time with my family actually, and go on vacation. So you won't hear from us probably for a little bit until after the BYU game. So they go to BYU on Tuesday night, and BYU, I mentioned it, this is a team firmly on the bubble at this point, I would say. They picked up a huge road win last night against West Virginia on Tuesday night. They went on the road to Morgantown and won that one. They're going to get K-State at home on Saturday with a chance for another, I guess, quality win at this point, considering what K-State is. I don't know how you would even classify that with K-State before they play Kansas. So this is a big stretch. And then if you look at who BYU has next after Kansas, it's Arizona. So this is sort of a make or break stretch for BYU if they want to really push and sort of secure themselves a spot in the NCAA tournament. What do you maybe expect out of that one when Kansas heads over to Provo on Tuesday night?
Yeah, that's going to be a tough one. That was the one I think that all of us circled in this stretch. It's the second game on that little, road swing. Bill Self has said, obviously, they're going to stay out there in Utah rather than fly back and then fly right back out. Igor Demeen, being a he's been talked about at times as a possible lottery pick, certainly, projects as a first-round pick. And to your point about, the BYU shooting really well, they have a better idea offensively of who they are than a lot of people do, because not only do they shoot the ball well from the outside, they take 48.2% of their shots from behind the arc. So they really lean into that. Defensively, not really that great. The one thing that they will do, I will say, Nick, is they rebound really, really well on the defensive glass. So usually you're one shot and done. And so that also represents a challenge. The bad news for BYU is people have often gotten pretty good shots against that defense. So the one shot, is all people need to be done at times. Also, BYU doesn't necessarily do the best job of defending the arc, Nick. And so if you're looking for a game for somebody like a Rylan Griffin to maybe, get some shots, try and get back into the fold a little bit as a shooter, if you're looking for a game for Zeke Mayo to hit some outside shots on the road, this could be that game for you. And so I do think it's a really interesting game. I think it's going to be an incredibly tight game. And it'll be one that Kansas will need to close out strong and not just close out strong at the end of the game, Nick. I think with this team in particular, there's a stretch that you can really look at: the 4 minutes at the end of a half and then the 4 minutes to start the second half. That sort of 8-minute period right there. It feels like KU doesn't get both of those right a whole lot. Like they'll be really good in one of them, but like not very good in the other. If KU wants to win this game, not only close out strong at the end of the game, but winning that sort of 8-minute time period right there could be a big thing too to watch.
Yeah, and you think about the Colorado game, I think they definitely lost on the first 4 minutes of the second half with a couple threes the Colorado hit. They did do pretty well at the end of the half to sort of recover when you think about it that way. But yeah, and this is a big game, as you said, about the 3-point arc. Like, you look around, and we talked about it, Kansas has some timid shooters right now. That's got to change, I think, especially in a game like the BYU game, where if BYU is going to be shooting threes, if you're Kansas, you probably need to be looking to shoot more from the perimeter as well to match that potentially also.
One guy we didn't bring up during the Colorado game who actually played pretty well, had some good moments.
Diggy.
Into that. Diggy Coy hits Diggy shots. We got to shout out Diggy when he plays well.
That's true.
Short kicks. I think that's another thing too that gives you some optimism for Rylan Griffin. Was Diggy couldn't hit water, falling out of a boat for a stretch there. He really slumped, and obviously has come out on the other side he never stopped playing with confidence, never stopped taking those shots, and they're falling again. And when they're falling again, it's weird because obviously Diggy does not fit the usual, I think, KU archetype for what you usually hit, but the dude hits some absolute daggers, and so it's been easy to see sometimes why they brought Diggy Coit in, because even with looking at it and saying, well, Shaq Moore should be the backup point guard, blah, blah, and looking at Diggy Coit's probably going to get other guys playing over the top of him. The number of big shots that Diggy has hit just in key moments this year, I feel like it is way out of proportion to the amount of time that he gets and that he plays.
Yeah, I mean, he hit 2 threes within a span of a couple minutes in the early portion of the second half to help kind of offset what Colorado had done at the start of the second half and put Kansas back in control a little bit. So, yeah, great point there. I feel bad that it took us this long even to mention him, because Short King, we got to mention him, right?
Yeah, we got to talk about him. So for sure, but another guy that if BYU isn't defending the arc well, and again, that's been a trait that we've seen with that team. Diggy's another guy that keep an eye on it that could wind up hitting a big shot or two that potentially helps swing that thing KU's way.
Okay, Kevin, let me ask you this: at Utah, at BYU, do you think Kansas goes 2-0 in this stretch?
Well, I got to be honest with you, Nick. My predictions have kind of been crap. So, I almost feel like I should be like, 0-2. It's never going to happen. But no, I do think they're probably going to come out fairly strong against Utah. I think the effort and energy against Colorado wasn't good enough. I think with a little bit of rest time, with it being the first game on the stretch. My worry with the BYU game, too, is playing back-to-back games at altitude, basically, like that. What's that going to do to you? Are your legs just going to give way at some point? And so I do think KU has what it takes to beat BYU. I think that it's a game that, particularly if it's a Hunter game where Hunter is giving you stuff inside and then you're getting those good looks on the outside, that KU can keep up with BYU's offense. And so I do think that I would probably pick KU to win both of these games. But honestly, I think KenPom has KU at 53-54% to win that BYU game. I might even call it a coin flip, to be honest with you, Nick. I think that it has a chance to be that. So I think they beat Utah. I think BYU is probably a coin flip, and I'll go ahead and go with KU in that one. But like you said, chance to be fatigued, a BYU team that desperately needs wins as they're on the bubble, a game on the road, with KU not necessarily playing the best on the road. There are a lot of things that are kind of stacking up, not in KU's favor in that one. And so if Kansas is able to go into Provo and come away with a win, I think that's a bigger win maybe than a lot of people would give KU credit for.
Oh, I agree with that last point about it would be a bigger win than I think people would give credit for. But I will take the other side of the coin in this case. I don't know. I have a bad feeling about that BYU game. I think if Kansas can take care of business against Utah, that'll be okay. On the BYU game, I don't know. I don't feel as confident as you do at this point.
Well, I said it was a coin flip, so I'm not sure.
No, I know. No, it's unfair to say that you're confident because you did say that's true. That is true. But yeah, so then that'll put Kansas then 3/5 of the way done with the stretch we talked about. They'll come back home to play against Oklahoma State on Saturday the 22nd. Then they get Colorado in Boulder after that before you set up for again. Do what?
Altitude again.
Yeah, altitude again. That's true. And then, but you set yourself up for March 1st, Texas Tech, who is currently 9 in KenPom. March 3rd, Big Monday against Houston, who was 3 in KenPom. And then you finish the season against Arizona, who is currently 14 in KenPom. So just to kind of, I sort of put a nice little neat bow on this whole conversation is Kansas needs to be in a better spot by the time they get to March 1st than what they are right now. And they've got a decent stretch to do that. The question is, can they step up and put a couple games together of quality play? So,
yeah, and I think, we talked about the consistency, also just important for their confidence, right? Like, I think that this team could stand to see some success in terms of if they're able to stack some wins together and start to feel pretty good about themselves. This is the team that we talked about. It has a little bit of maybe front runner to them, where when they're playing well, when things are going right, they can be awfully tough to beat. And if you're able to parlay that into a win against Texas Tech coming off of that 5-game stretch, I think you're gonna you have a team that could be kind of dangerous at that point. But it's all going to depend on these next few games.
Absolutely. Kevin, any final thoughts before we wrap things up here for the show?
No, I'm interested to see the road trip out there. It's one of those things that if you don't pay attention to college basketball, after KU plays, which I certainly understand, the Pac-12, always used to do kind of these packaged road trips, right, where somebody would go to play at Oregon, and then they would have at Oregon State, right there next to it. And so you would stay out on the road and knock out both of those games together. And that was kind of how they dealt with it. Big 12, sometimes you've been left to the wolves, right? If you have like a game at home and then you've got like West Virginia on Big Monday or something, you have to fly out there. I'm interested to see how this road trip goes, the energy level that KU plays with, particularly in that second game against BYU, but something to watch, not just for this year, but sort of, hey, how's Kansas gonna handle these, road games away from Kansas? All road games except for K-State are away from Kansas, but the ones that are significant trips out there, how are they going to handle these road trips in the future?
For sure. That's going to wrap things up on this edition of the Paid Podcast. He's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. As I said, I'm going to be on a little bit of vacation, so you may not hear from us for a little bit until maybe after the BYU game next week. So, Rock Chalk, as always. Hopefully Kansas figures it out, picks up a couple wins. Looking forward to keeping track of that. And thanks so much again to everybody that has subscribed to us. If you are new to the channel, if you're listening on our audio, subscribe there. If you're on YouTube, subscribe as well. Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. And drop a comment, share your thoughts as well. Join in on the conversation. Plenty of ways to get involved with us. Thank you to Home Field Apparel and Emprise Bank, our sponsors. And until next time, he's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. We'll talk to you again soon. See ya.